The moment my mother-in-law pointed at me across that dining table and called me a thief in front of everyone she knew. She had no idea. She had no idea that the bracelet she was accusing me of stealing had been in my biological family for generations. That it had been taken from us the same year I was taken from them. That the woman sitting in my chair, dabbing fake tears into a paper napkin, was sleeping with my husband and plotting to steal an entirely different inheritance. She had no idea that I had been quietly documenting everything for months. Every dollar. Every hour. Every mistake they made that I had silently fixed so they never had to face the consequences. She had no idea that I wasn't just a wife she could throw away. I was the entire system holding that family together. And I had already started counting down to the moment I walked out the door and took the math with me. My name is Melissa. And this is the story of how a woman with no biological family, no safety net, and no one in her corner, built a 47-page document, waited for exactly the right moment, and dismantled everything they thought was permanent. People think revenge starts with anger. Mine started with a spreadsheet. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the bracelet. Before the bracelet. Before any of this. Because if I start with the accusation, you won't feel the weight of what it took to get to the moment I walked out of a diner on Route 9 and left a man named Gerald Schaefer sitting alone with 47 pages of proof that his family had consumed 3 years of my life and called it love. I met Derek Schaefer when I was 22. He was, on paper, everything my foster mother Patrice had convinced me to want. His family had money. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes with a vinyl banner. An actual banner, red, white, and blue, that read Schaefer family, living the dream, hung across the garage every 4th of July. Custom made from a print shop downtown. I drove past that banner the night everything changed. But I'll get there. What I want you to understand first is what those 3 years of marriage actually cost me. And I mean that in numbers. Because I kept numbers. I started the spreadsheet 14 months into the marriage. Quietly. On my personal laptop. Late at night while Derek slept. Something in me, some careful, arithmetic part of me that had been forged by years of having nothing and needing to track everything, knew that one day I was going to need to show someone the math. I managed every bill. Every insurance renewal. Every vendor account. Every payroll cycle. Every contract. Every compliance deadline for both the Schaefer family home and the landscaping business they ran. Without a salary. Without a title. Without acknowledgement. I benchmarked my labor against what a professional office manager earns in our county. $52,400 a year. Over 36 months, that's $157,000. In unpaid work. Work I did so well and so quietly that no one ever thought to ask who was doing it. Then there were the financial shortfalls. Groceries, utilities, school supplies for Derek's niece and nephew, kids who were at the house 3 days a week because the family needed someone to feed them, and that someone was always me. $14,800 of my own money. Never framed as a loan. Just framed as me being a good wife. I won't bore you with every line item. The total was $242,000. $242,000 that nobody called a debt. They called it family. Remember that sentence. Because it comes back around later. Now let me tell you about the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling clear. It was a Tuesday in October. I know it was a Tuesday because I remember the day of the week the way you remember the precise second something broke and stopped making sound. I was walking down the hallway toward the home office to print something when I heard Linda's voice through the partially closed door. She was on the phone. I heard my name. I stopped. She said, and I need you to hear this exactly, she said, the problem with Melissa is that she does everything because she has nowhere else to go. She's not doing it for him. She's doing it because without this family, she's nobody. You take away the Schaefer name and what does she have? A foster mother who sold her and a brother who borrows money he'll never return. There was a pause. Then she laughed. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute. I did not knock on the door. I did not confront her. I walked back to the kitchen and I finished whatever I had been doing, something ordinary, something invisible, and that night I opened a new tab on my laptop. And I started documenting. Every night for 6 weeks. They thought my silence meant I had nothing. Every single night, I was counting. I captured screenshots. I pulled copies of contracts I had negotiated. Emails I had sent from the shared business account. Insurance certificates I had renewed. Vendor agreements with my handwriting in the margin notes. I kept 2 copies of everything in the cloud and 1 copy on a thumb drive in a zipper pocket inside my gym bag. The packet, when it was finally printed and bound, was 47 pages. It had a cover sheet that read, Schaefer Family Business, Undisclosed Labor and Financial Contributions, 2019 to 2022. 5 sections. Administrative labor. Financial contributions. Prevented liability events. Unpaid family loans. And a final section I titled simply, Context. I printed it at a FedEx office at 10:30 at night. The woman at the counter didn't look up. I stood at that printer and watched 47 pages come out warm and clean, and I felt something I can only describe as geometric. Like a shape clicking into place. But that's not where the story ends. Because 6 months before I printed that packet, 6 months before I was ready to use it, the bracelet appeared. And the bracelet changed everything. Here is what happened. Derek's family had a piece of jewelry appraised. A jade bracelet. Old Chinese imperial carving. Deep green, with a gold clasp. It had come into the Schaefer house through an estate sale Derek's father had helped facilitate years prior. He'd accepted a few items as payment for some landscaping work. The bracelet had sat in Linda's jewelry box for 2 years without anyone paying much attention to it. Then the appraiser told her it was worth $1.2 million. After that, the bracelet became a presence. Linda wore it to church. She wore it to family events. She wore it the way you wear something when you want everyone in the room to understand who it belongs to. Then it went missing. It went missing on a Thursday in March. The same week my foster mother Patrice had called me 3 times asking for money. The same week Tyler, my foster brother, had come to the house while I was at the grocery store and Derek had let him in. The same week I had, per my notes, been at the house for 11 of the 14 waking hours. Never once leaving my purse unattended. Linda called a family meeting. Not a phone call. An actual meeting. Derek's father at the head of the table. 2 aunts present. Derek standing against the counter. And Cassidy. Cassidy, who I had not yet been formally introduced to as anything other than a family friend, was sitting in my chair. At my table. In the home I had cleaned and managed and held together with my own hands. Dabbing fake tears into a paper napkin. Linda pointed at me, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, and said, "She took it. She took it because her family needed money and she didn't have the spine to just ask." I was standing in the kitchen doorway. Still holding the dish towel I'd been using to dry plates from a dinner I had cooked. I looked at Derek. He looked at the table. I want to be precise about what happened in my body in that moment. It was not shock. It was not even humiliation, exactly. It was something colder. Something that felt like confirmation. His father spoke next. Slow. Measured. The voice of a man who uses patience as a weapon. "Melissa. If there's something you want to tell us, now would be the time." I said, "I didn't take your bracelet." That was all I said. Then Linda said they were calling the police. Derek's father said maybe let's not escalate. One of the aunts said what everyone in that room was already thinking: if I agreed to sign the divorce papers, which had, apparently, already been prepared, they would not pursue a theft accusation. I looked at Derek one more time. He was still looking at the table. I said, "Fine. I'll divorce you. But before we sign anything, we settle the accounts." The room shifted. Something in Linda's face changed, not anger, but something colder. Recalibration. They pushed back fast. Tried to reframe the whole conversation. Suddenly, I wasn't just a wife they were divorcing. I was a thief who owed them the bracelet, plus living expenses, plus some vague accounting they pulled from thin air. They named a figure. $850,000 they claimed I owed them. I looked at that number. I said nothing. I signed nothing. I left, drove to a parking lot 2 miles away, sat in my car with the engine running, and kept both hands steady on the wheel. That was their first mistake. They made 3 more. But before I get to those mistakes, before I show you how the collapse happened, I need to tell you about the morning a man named Edmund Graves found me in a grocery store holding a photograph. Because without that morning, none of the rest of it makes sense. It was a Wednesday. 3 weeks after I had moved out of the Schaefer house and into a rented room I shared with 2 nurses who worked night shifts. The house was always quiet. Which was fine. Quiet was something I had learned to work inside of. I was in the produce section when I became aware of a man standing completely still at the far end of the aisle, looking at me. He was holding a photograph. He walked toward me slowly, the way people walk when they're afraid the thing they've been looking for is about to disappear. He asked to see my hand. Specifically, he asked to see the web of my right hand. There is a red mole there, small, specific, not something most people notice. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked back up at me. And he told me I was the biological daughter of the Hartley family. I did not believe him immediately. Let me be clear about that. I sat across from him in a diner booth for 2 hours and I asked every question I could think of. He answered every single one. Documents. Certified DNA analysis. Photographs of a woman who shared my jaw and my hands. Records of a disappearance filed when I was 4 years old that had never been closed. I had been kidnapped. Taken from my family at 4 years old. And they had been searching for me for 20 years. I drove back to my rented room and I sat on the edge of the bed. And I thought about the bracelet. The bracelet that had come into the Schaefer house through an estate transaction. The bracelet from a Chinese collection, old imperial carving, deep green, with a gold clasp. The bracelet they had accused me of stealing. What are the odds? What are the actual odds? I didn't have the provenance record yet. That came later. But in that moment, sitting on the edge of a bed in a rented room with a shared kitchen and 2 nurses who were almost never home, I had a feeling I couldn't name yet. The closest word I have for it is inevitable. I asked Mr. Graves to let me join the Hartley family company as an intern. Without announcing who I was. He thought I was being sentimental. He wasn't entirely wrong. But I also had a specific reason. I wanted to understand what I was walking into before I walked into it. And I wanted to finish the thing I had already started. The Hartley Group's design division was in a clean glass building downtown. I was hired as a fashion design intern. I used my legal first name. No one connected it. What I found in my first week was that someone had already been running a very specific game inside that building for a long time. Her name was Cassidy. Yes. That Cassidy. She had, through a series of moves I will give her credit for in terms of sheer audacity, positioned herself as the presumed Hartley heiress within the design division. She hadn't explicitly claimed the identity. She'd simply allowed people to assume. She dropped specific details in conversation, properties she had visited, antiques she could identify by name, the correct terminology for family holdings, that she had clearly researched and rehearsed. She wore clothing from my biological mother's personal collection that had been quietly removed from the family home by a housekeeper on her payroll. She had brought Derek to company events. Derek, my freshly divorced husband, repositioned, in Cassidy's narrative, as the potential partner of someone important. I watched all of this from my desk as an intern. I want to pause here and say something plainly. What Cassidy did required a ruthlessness I respected the way you respect a natural disaster. She was not improvising. She had studied the Hartley family with the precision of someone who had been planning this for years. She had made a calculated bet that the real heir would never surface, and if she did, that the table would already be set too firmly to overturn. The table was set. I just happened to be a better chess player. I kept my head down. I did my work. And here is the part one didn't expect. I was extraordinarily good at it. Whatever talent I had been sitting on for 30 years, untrained and unexplored, apparently ran in my blood. Within 6 weeks, I had attracted the attention of a major client who commissioned a 3-year custom design contract based solely on the portfolio I'd submitted as a junior intern. Cassidy tried to have me fired twice. Both times, the client contract protected my position. I didn't celebrate. I documented it. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, the Schaefer business was beginning its quiet collapse. This is the part one need you to understand about invisible labor. When the person holding a system together walks out the door, the system doesn't collapse immediately. It fails quietly, at the exact points where they were holding it up. And then, one by one, those failures compound. Day 6 after I removed myself from the shared administrative accounts, the commercial auto insurance on 3 business trucks lapsed. Derek's father found out when a field supervisor called from a job site they'd been flagged during a compliance check. The trucks had to be pulled. They lost 2 days of billing on a $22,000 contract. That was their first mistake landing. They'd made it years ago. They were just paying for it now. Day 11, the payroll processor sent a bounced payment notification. The funding account had dropped below the minimum balance threshold, a threshold I had been manually monitoring and correcting for 18 months without anyone knowing. 2 field workers received partial pay and no explanation. One of them called Derek. Derek called his father. His father called the payroll company. The payroll company told him this was a recurring issue that had historically been resolved from the administrative side. He asked who had been handling the administrative side. There was a pause. Day 17, the primary vendor account for materials was placed on credit hold. A net 30 invoice had gone 19 days past due. I used to make a courtesy call on day 15 of every cycle. The account manager had expected my call. It never came. She locked the account. 3 active jobs needed materials within the week. Day 22, the liability certificate for their largest commercial account expired without renewal. 6 years of business. 72 hours to provide updated documentation or the contract goes under review. That was the first call from Gerald. He left a voicemail in his banker voice. Measured, professional, careful. Said there seemed to be a misunderstanding with some of the business accounts and he was hoping to speak with me at my convenience. At my convenience. The phrase of a man who has never once considered another person's convenience but suddenly needs something very badly. I didn't return the call. The second call was Derek. Soft voice. Said he missed me. Said things had gotten complicated. Said Cassidy wasn't what I thought. Used my first name 3 times in 45 seconds, which is the conversational equivalent of waving your arms in a parking lot. I didn't return that call either. Third call was Linda. She didn't pretend. Said certain things had gotten disorganized since the separation and she was wondering if I could walk someone through a few processes. Someone. She meant herself. She didn't know any of the processes. She had never needed to learn them. Because I had been there. I listened to the full voicemail. I saved it. The fourth call came on a Sunday morning from an unknown number. Gerald again. The message was 7 minutes long. The first 2 minutes, explaining the situation as though I wasn't already fully aware. The next 2, shifting from explaining to requesting. The final 3, and this is the part one have listened to more times than I will admit, the final 3 began with a reference to my outstanding contributions and ended with, "Melissa, you are a member of this family regardless of what has happened between you and Derek, and I think we all know that this family needs you right now." There it is. That sentence. The one that took 3 years, $242,000, and a false theft accusation to produce. I played it 3 times. Then I called Mr. Graves and told him I was ready to take a meeting. I chose a diner on Route 9. I chose it because it was Gerald's kind of place. Trucks in the parking lot. Regulars at the counter. A booth in the back where nobody would stop him from raising his voice if he decided to raise his voice. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the waitress who refilled coffee to be able to describe what she saw. I wanted that to be the room where a controlled, specific, documented conversation happened between someone who had prepared and someone who had not. I arrived 11 minutes early. Ordered coffee. Placed the packet on the seat beside me with the cover sheet face down. Gerald arrived 4 minutes late. Which was intentional. Because Gerald always arrived 4 minutes late. He slid into the booth and looked at me the way you look at something you expected to be smaller than it is. He said, "You look well." I said, "Thank you for coming." He ordered coffee. Said he was glad we were talking. Said he thought things had gotten out of hand and he hoped we could find a way forward that was good for everyone. I let him finish. Then I lifted the packet from the seat beside me, placed it on the table, and slid it toward him without a word. He looked at the cover sheet. He looked at me. He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's organized into 5 sections. The first section is administrative labor. There are dates, descriptions, and market rate comparisons. The second section is financial contributions, with receipts." He opened to the first page. Read for 30 seconds. Looked up. I said nothing. He turned to the second page and read longer. I watched the line of his jaw change. Not anger. Something more like recalibration, the same micro-expression that crosses a person's face when the story they've been telling themselves collides with documentation. He reached the section on prevented liability events. He stopped. He said, "The insurance lapse." I said, "Section 3. Pages 19 through 22. He turned to those pages and read them slowly. By the time he looked up again, something had shifted in his eyes. Something I can only describe as the specific expression of a person who has just understood, for the first time, the full cost of something they had always treated as free. He tried 4 things in the next 20 minutes. Minimization, some of these valuations are a bit generous. I said, "Page 43. Bureau of Labor Statistics figures for this county." Reframing, what we're really talking about is what marriage means in terms of contribution. I said, "The marriage is over. The contributions are documented." Personal appeal, "Melissa, I always liked you." I said, "I know." Negotiation, "What is it that you actually want here?" I said, "Nothing from you." He blinked. I said, "This packet is a copy. My attorney has the original. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here because I think you deserve to see the math before it shows up somewhere else." I stood up. Picked up my coffee. Looked at him for one long moment. I said, "Gerald. The commercial account called again yesterday. You have 41 hours left on that notice. I put a 20 on the table for the coffee. And I walked out. What happened next arrived in installments. Because that's how consequences work when the person holding a system together quietly removes herself. The commercial park account did not renew the Schaefer contract. Compliance concerns. New vendor selected. That account represented approximately $185,000 in annual revenue, roughly 40% of the business's stable income. Without it, the cash flow projections they had built their operation around became unworkable. Gerald had taken loans against 2 pieces of equipment. Both missed their quarterly payments. The equipment financing company sent notices. 3 smaller commercial accounts received quarterly invoices with errors. The billing template I had maintained for 3 years had been rebuilt incorrectly by someone who didn't understand how I had structured it. 2 clients called with complaints. 1 didn't renew. Derek called me from a different number on a Thursday night. He had clearly been drinking. He said things I won't repeat here because they don't deserve to live in this story. And then, about 4 minutes in, his voice changed. He said, "Melissa, I need help." I said, "I know." He said, "Can you come back? Just for the accounts. Not anything else." I said, "No." He was quiet. And then, and this is the part that surprised me, he said, "Was it always this bad? Did I always?" And then he stopped. I said, "Yes." And I ended the call. There are families that stay stable by feeding one person to the tension. By placing one capable, quiet, invisible person at the center of every problem and letting her absorb it. Remove that person and the tension has nowhere to go. I had been that person. Not because I was weak. Because I was capable. Because the most capable person in a room full of people who don't want to do the work always ends up doing the work, until the day she stops. When I stopped, the Schaefer family had nothing left holding their system up. The house went on the market 6 months later. Gerald and Linda moved into a smaller property his parents had left them. Derek moved into a studio apartment. And Cassidy's carefully constructed fiction at the Hartley Group collapsed on the morning my biological mother walked into the design department, saw Cassidy wearing a custom jacket from her personal collection, and asked, in front of 14 people, who she was. I was at my desk across the floor when it happened. There was a moment, one specific moment, where Cassidy looked up and our eyes met. And for just a second, she looked genuinely afraid. The way you look when you've been running a long con and you realize the person you underestimated has been in the building the whole time. I gave her nothing. Not a smile. Not a nod. Not a single word. My mother walked toward me instead. And now I need to tell you about the provenance record. Mr. Graves came to my apartment with a document. It was a provenance record for a jade bracelet, old Chinese imperial carving, deep green, with a gold clasp, that had been part of my biological grandmother's private collection. It had disappeared from a storage facility during the same period I had been taken. It had moved through several informal transactions over the following 2 decades, each one untraceable, until it ended up in an estate sale, and then in Linda Schaefer's jewelry box. Mr. Graves placed the document on my kitchen table. He said, quietly, "It was yours. It was always yours." I sat with that for a long time. The bracelet arrived by certified courier on a Thursday in November. A padded envelope. Gerald's handwriting on the return address label. No note. No letter. I opened it at my kitchen table. I lifted the bracelet out and held it in my hand. The jade was heavier than I expected. The carving was intricate, flowers, and a character I later learned meant return. I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere surprising. Then I sat very still for a while. The last time I heard Gerald's voice, he called from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up because I was expecting a call from an interior designer. He said, "Melissa, I have something I'd like to return to you." He meant the bracelet. I told him it had already arrived. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I hope you're well." I said, "I am." He said, "I'm glad." And then, and I did not expect this, he said, "My son was a fool. I want you to know that I know that." I said, "I know." I let the silence sit. Then I said, "Gerald, thank you for mailing it." And I ended the call. I have thought about that call many times. About what it costs a man like Gerald Schaefer to pick up a phone and say the closest thing to sorry he has ever been capable of saying. About whether it matters. I don't know if it matters. I know that it happened. I know that I received it without giving anything back that I hadn't chosen to give. And I know that the bracelet is on my bookshelf. And that my grandmother's name is engraved on the inside of the clasp. And that I am the person whose name comes after hers. I run the Hartley Group's design division now. Not because it was handed to me. I started as an intern. I earned every promotion I received. I have the client contracts and the performance records to prove it. Nathan, the client who had commissioned that 3-year design contract, the man who let a moment mean what it means without filling it up with noise, proposed on a Tuesday. Just a Tuesday. No announcement. No performance. Just a question, and 2 people who had been through enough to know exactly what they were saying yes to. We have 2 cats with highly specific opinions about where they are allowed to sit. We have a house that I chose and decorated and bought with my own money. I have never in my life been as comfortable in a space as I am in that house. My foster brother Tyler called me 3 days after the press announcement. His voice was different than it had been in all the years I'd known him. Quieter. Less rehearsed. He said, "I knew. When they were setting you up at the Schaefers, I knew what they were doing with the money." I didn't say anything. "I want you to know I knew." I said, "I know you knew." There was a long silence. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Melissa." I believed him. I don't know if believing him changed anything. I gave him one conversation, one honest acknowledgement that I hurt him, and I didn't offer more than that. Not because I'm without mercy. Because mercy is not the same as reopening a door. He didn't ask for money. I noticed that. It was the most human he had ever been with me, and I think it cost him something, and I think that cost was the closest he'd ever come to understanding what it had cost me. I want to tell you something about the woman who stood in that kitchen doorway holding a dish towel. Watching a room full of people decide she was guilty of something she hadn't done. Watching a husband she had spent 3 years supporting look at the table instead of at her. I want to tell her something specific. Not that it gets better in the vague, useless way people say things get better. I want to tell her, you are the most dangerous person in that room right now. You just don't know it yet. The danger isn't in your anger. The danger is in your precision. In the fact that you are standing there memorizing every detail because some part of you already knows that one day the details will be the whole story. The Schaefer family's greatest mistake was not the accusation. It wasn't the divorce papers. It wasn't the false accounting or the missing bracelet or the years of erased labor. Their greatest mistake was believing that the person who kept the lights on would keep them on out of loyalty to people who had never once, not once in 3 years, thought to ask what it cost her. They confused my silence for submission. They confused my staying for having nowhere else to go. They confused my patience for weakness. They were wrong about all 3. I was staying because I was counting. And when I was done counting, I left. I took the math with me. And the rest, as they say, worked itself out. They didn't lose me. They lost the system I was holding together.